Hi everyone, I'm Jessie Jia, and thank you so much for joining our Women in STEM seminar today. Our seminar basically invites guest speakers who are female, either working in STEM-related areas, or are students currently majoring in, or is going to major in any STEM-related majors. And so we asked them to share their experience or any struggles they face as women in STEM, and also we asked them to share any general advice they might have for high school or middle school students, especially girls who are also interested in STEM. And so today we have two amazing guest speakers, the first one being Erica Wu, who is going to be a first year at Oxford this coming school year. And the second speaker we have is Rachel Zhu, who graduated from Georgia Tech with a BS in Industrial Engineering and an MS in Supply Chain Engineering. And so yeah, let's get started.
Hello girls, I am Zuna Wu, or if you prefer, you can also call me by my English name, Erica. It's my greatest honor to be invited here as a speaker to present my story of being a woman in science. I will start by briefly summarizing my journey in the last application season. So I came to US for my first 2 years of high school. And for some personal reason, I went back to Shanghai and got my high school diploma there. Graduated as the valedictorian of the school. I am not an admission officer, but my guess on the so-called shining points on my application are my laboratory practical skills and also the 2 summer schools I did. The first one I did was at the University of Pennsylvania, and the other one is at the University of Chicago. And I also successfully secured a recommendation letter from both programs. And according to my college counselor, since I cannot read the letter myself, one of them is extremely strong and filled with details. So I think these things really helped me in my application process. Because of the uncertainty in sprawling the year of 2020, as everybody knows, I decided to apply for both US and UK universities. And by the end, I got admitted into Oxford, Imperial College London, Vanderbilt, Emory, UC Berkeley, UC Los Angeles, etc. I'll be honest here. At first, UK universities were considered only as a backup for me. But, a blow of fate. Who knows, I would eventually end up committing to the UK. So this fall, I will leave for UK and begin my college life as a first-year student at the University of Oxford. As you know, undergraduate students in the UK universities declare the major when they make the application. And for me, mine is biochemistry, molecular, and cellular biology. Just in case you are not quite familiar with this field of study, it is essentially an application of chemistry under biological contexts. So our course at the University of Oxford constitutes 5 big topics: cellular biochemistry, molecular biochemistry, mechanistic biochemistry, physical biochemistry, and quantitative biochemistry. I think I may narrow down my study and choose to focus on either genetics or oncology or neuroscience in the future. As for my plan after Oxford, I'm definitely reading a PhD in the US, and then afterwards, I may either stay in academia and develop myself in basic or transitional research, or I may join a biotech company as a developer. But again, everything can change. But I am pretty sure that this will be the grand direction I am working towards. To be frank, whenever I share my dream about my future, or perhaps more like my ambition, people will look at me with an eye of surprise. They'll be like, oh, so you want to be a scientist? Though I'm actually not quite so comfortable when people act like that, I tend to be agreeable. So I just look back, smile, and try to play it off. Yes, and I hope you don't have any problem with that. But I'll admit, there was this one time I just got really confrontational. So I was at an interview by a Chinese educational institution to give advice for future Chinese international students. Again, when I mentioned my envision about my future, the reporter exclaimed, kinda, but this time with an extra word. So she was kind of like writing on her little notebook and said this. Oh, so you want to be a female scientist? It is that small word that really got into my nerves. But I calmed myself down and asked her, I don't know, but perhaps we can remove that modifier? I mean, people know I am a girl. She replied, not realizing what I actually implied. Yes, but I mean, female scientist just sounds somewhat more surprising and impressive to people, right? Well, her attitude just got me really thinking. At least in China, when people say scientists, the first image conjured is usually a man but not a woman. This stereotype is so prevalent to a degree that a reporter, a woman herself, believes that adding a modifier female in front of the word scientists can actually make her article more eye-catching, more unusual somewhat. Then I looked up the male to female ratio in Chinese Academy of Science and found an extraordinarily unbalanced data of 95% to 5%. This definitely needs to be changed. It's even more unbalanced than the male to female ratio among US politicians, right? But how can we change that when even the media fails to recognize that girls like me can be as privileged to dream about being a scientist as boys? And then, 2 months later, I was shocked by another news. The 19th of July, Chinese Department of Science and Technology, along with 13 other departments, announced a plan to promote female power in scientific and technological development. Sure, so far it sounds all good to me. But let's look at how exactly the departments want to achieve such a goal. So basically, for all types of assessments for funding and other things, female researchers in STEM will have a priority compared with males who are equally worthy. And I just don't approve that. I just don't think that prioritization is ever an appropriate way to achieve equality. And I don't think that special treatments is what contemporary feminism is asking for. Be it STEM or humanity, be it scholarly or professional spheres. Everything should just be merit-based instead of gender-based. Just think about that. If someone tells you that you got the research funding, not because you outperformed the guy in the neighboring lab, but because you just happen to have 2 X chromosomes instead of 1 X and 1 Y. How would you feel? How would you think? I mean, if it is for me, definitely not too happy, I would say. In my eyes, I think the ideal for we women in STEM is that we cooperate and compete in our respective fields equally with our endeavor and soft and hard skills. That no one would ever exclaim over you dreaming of being a female scientist, engineer, or whatever. That we will not need this type of webinar for women in STEM, but STEM students as a whole, all together, boys and girls inclusive. I believe this ideal is attainable. So, what can I do? I asked myself, and my heart answered. I will keep my eyes on my dreams and walk step by step assiduously. And one day, if possible, I will tell the same reporter who said, "Oh, so you want to be a female scientist?" I will tell her, "This time, please leave this modifier for me. I am a scientist." So, all of these above are from my personal perspective. It's likely that it will not be quite applicable to you because my story involves mostly about the present China. But if there's anything I learned from my experience, I would ask you, girls, to really think about who you identify yourself as for now and what type of person you want to be. Then you just work for it, regardless of the background noise. Being a STEM woman or not. Remember that it's never a justification for discrimination or a ratification for prioritized treatments. You are just you.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Rachel Zhu. I graduated from Georgia Tech with a BS in industrial engineering in 2018, and then my MS right after in supply chain engineering in 2019. While I was at Tech, I interned at Cisco Systems and then Amazon. I was also a resident advisor on campus. And then after graduating, I actually went back to Cisco for about a year and a half and just recently changed jobs. I'm a management trainee at McMaster Carr now. So I'm happy to answer any questions y'all might have.
Because I think a lot of our audience really wants to go to GT or is very interested in applying to GT. So what would you say is the school culture like?
So I would say, so I graduated from Northview. I'm class of 2015, and I think one thing I remember about Northview is that it was really competitive. I would say that at Georgia Tech, that's not been the case at all. The culture is super, super collaborative. And I'm the first person to admit I'm not the smartest person in the room. You know, when I went to Tech, there were so many people who were so much smarter than me mathematically, whatever. And I was like a top student at Northview, but I learned very quickly that, we are big fish in a small pond. But the one really humbling thing is that everyone is really, really down to earth. And so whenever I had an issue, there was always somebody who was willing to step in and help. So like we would work on homeworks together, we would study for tests together. So overall, I think the culture is really, really good, and you really develop your personal skills, your communication skills, and overall just a great experience.
Okay. And what do you love most about your major, industrial engineering? Or can you introduce a bit of the major?
Yeah, I figured when I introduced myself, I was like, okay, I went through my majors. I don't think anyone has any idea what I'm talking about. So industrial engineering so the best way I can describe it is like it's business engineering, right? So things like chemical engineering, you're looking at different chemicals, like maybe looking at working for Clorox. Mechanical engineering is pretty self-explanatory. But industrial engineering is a type of engineering where you're looking at business processes and you use a lot of statistics and you use a lot of probability. And what you're looking at is, for example, data analytics within businesses. So if you have like certain customers, what drives their buying behavior, how do you predict demand, right? Because if you have a demand for a certain product, how do you make sure that your store has enough items to meet that demand, right? Like otherwise, if it's a super popular item and you don't have anything in stock, well, then you're not making money because they're going to take their money elsewhere and go buy the product somewhere else. And so, and like that's not the only thing. You can also look at warehouse layouts. Like for example, Amazon gets everything to your door in about 2 days, right? So they have a very specific delivery network. They strategically place buildings or fulfillment centers throughout the US to make sure that they can deliver within 2 days. And then even within a warehouse where you store material, takes some calculations, because if it's like a really, really popular material, you want to store it very close to where it'll get shipped out. Whereas like if it's something that's not super popular, because a warehouse is so big, you'll probably like store it in the back because no one ever orders it. But if it's like something that everybody orders, so for example, hand sanitizer during the pandemic, right? Like that's something that even in the stores, they put it on the shelves closest to the door because they know that that's what people are looking for.
Do you have any like working experience or like specific experience in the industrial engineering?
Yeah, so my 2 internships, so I co-opt at Cisco, and what a co-op is you do 1 semester of work and then 1 semester of study, and then you rotate that 3 times. So I actually co-opt at Cisco, which is 3 semesters, and then I did 2 internships with Amazon while I was at Tech, and all of this was within the supply chain, the industrial engineering space. So at Cisco, I was a project manager. I was on the global logistics team, and so we have a shipping network within Cisco. So Cisco, if you don't know, manufactures like routers and modems. So like what you use to connect to the internet, all of that hardware is something that Cisco makes. And we have a very complex manufacturing design and also a delivery design. And what makes it a little bit challenging is Cisco doesn't actually manufacture anything themselves. They contract these out to third-party logistics providers or third-party manufacturers and just oversees the production, right? And so there's a lot of work to be done in terms of like coordinating what gets delivered when, and then also looking at the prices. And so for my co-op, I was on the global logistics finance team, if you will. So I'm looking at the cost of shipping, like is there a better way to ship something? Like for example, if a person wants a product maybe in a week, we don't need to overnight it, right? Because that's going to be really expensive and they got their product, 6 days earlier than they expected it. So things like that. And then at Amazon, I did 2 different internships. One, I was in Las Vegas. I worked with the returns team. So for the returns team, when you return something to Amazon, you ship it back to a warehouse and they have people who look at the quality of the item that's returned and says like, yes, this looks like brand new, we can sell it secondhand, or like, okay, this is awful, we need to throw it out. And so I was looking at doing some reporting for that. So specifically when a customer returns an item, they can make comments as to why they returned something. And I was tasked to build a word cloud that will update with customer comments based on what the item is. So for example, a vacuum, one of the keywords that would come up is dust. So we would know that, okay, people who buy vacuums secondhand, when they open the box and expect like a brand new vacuum or something that's like new, if it has dust in it, they're not going to be happy. So before we ship out a vacuum, we should look at and make sure that the filters are clean and whatever before we sell it secondhand. And the second time I worked at Amazon, I was on the innovation design team. And what we looked at was building fulfillment centers. So specifically, Amazon has some fulfillment centers where like, usually you think of a warehouse, you have like lots of racks, right? So think of like Costco. So Costco is essentially a big warehouse where you have lots of items that's placed everywhere and people go and find the items. But at Amazon, they are testing technology where they have little robots. It's called Amazon Robotics. And these robots are like maybe, a couple feet by couple feet big. But what they do is they have like a rack on top of them. And so they drive the material to a picker. So instead of a picker running around a rack, it's like the rack coming to you. And so the way you design a building where there's like little robots running around is very different than if you have a building where, you know, all of your items are standing in one place, if you will. And so there was some work to be done there in terms of like, okay, how do we design this warehouse? Which are the they're not manufacturers, but like the contractors who build these buildings, you know, like who do we need to contact? How are they going to be able to design this building and provide the material in a timely manner to meet our deadlines to make sure that this building gets built according to specs?
You mentioned like you need to work with people in a lot of your jobs. So would you say these jobs are more like doing your own thing, or are they more collaborative?
So supply chain is definitely much more collaborative. So now that I've been exposed to the industry for about 5 years since when I first started interning at Cisco, honestly, it's a miracle that anything arrives to your door at all. Because if you think about it, you have to source the raw material, right? You have to manufacture it in a plant. And typically in today's society, we're not manufacturing in the US, right? So we're manufacturing somewhere in China or somewhere in Asia, right? And then we get all of that stuff put together, and then we put it on a boat or put it on a plane, and then we ship it over to the US. And then there's like people like FedEx, UPS, whatever, they need to pick up all of this material and then deliver it to your door. And so supply chain is just, honestly, it's one big group effort to have things from raw materials turn up into, like, you know, so this is the closest thing near me, but like a remote control that shows up at your doorstep with a TV, because you have to, you know, have everything manufactured, packaged correctly, and then tracked the entire way to make sure it shows up to the correct person's doorstep.
Okay, so going back to a little bit of your experience in Georgia Tech, what are the some undergraduate opportunities for internship or research and employment, if you still remember?
So tech has a lot of opportunities. I would say that most people by year 2 or year 3 will have internships. As long as that's something that you're thinking about, there's a lot of different societies that you can join that help look at your resume, that help just talk about your career goals. Like there's a whole internal portal that's, I don't know if it's still called Career Buzz, but when I was there, it was called Career Buzz, where they just listed all sorts of opportunities, like which majors it was available for, what sort of skill sets they were looking for. And a lot of the clubs do that as well. So for example, for me, I was part of a business fraternity called Alpha Kappa Psi. What they did was you rushed and pledged, but your pledging process was more about professional development. And so we would have to set up coffee chats with all of the brothers. And so I think I talked to like 40 to 60 people that semester. And so I got really good at making small talk and learning about other people's professional aspirations or like what they were looking for, because you're just put into that environment, right? And they also help you with interview processes, and then they look at your resume. And Alpha Kappa Psi is not the only organization that does that. There's like Society of Women Engineers, there's all sorts of like honor societies for each of your individual majors, and you'll also like find friends on campus, and you can talk to upperclassmen, right? And they'll be able to, if you reach out and be like, hey, I need help, or hey, I have this interview coming up, can you help look at my resume, or can you help coach me? There's always going to be somebody who is willing and able to give you feedback for things like that. And in terms of opportunities, like I said, there's such things as a co-op, right, which is where you work one semester and then take classes one semester. There's internships. You can also do research. So I have a couple of friends who are aerospace engineering, and they tend to have very difficult course loads or like internships, right? So maybe their first summer or their second summer, they're taking classes or they're doing research for a professor. I know that they are well connected, or Georgia Tech is well connected. They were looking at working on a satellite that was supposed to be used by NASA recently. And so, there's going to be all sorts of different opportunities if you go looking for them.
So, although it's like kind of a long time ago, but do you remember anything about your college application? Like maybe how did you prepare, or like what did you write?
Gosh, so my college application, so I'll be honest, when I applied, Georgia Tech, I applied to I think 12 schools, and Georgia Tech was number 11 on my list. So Georgia Tech was not my first choice, but I do remember I applied early decision, and I wrote my applications just to the best of my ability. If I remember correctly, Tech's essay was not as challenging, or like not as creative as, like, for example, I remember like UChicago's essay is usually pretty, or you have to be pretty creative. I don't know if that's still the case, but I remember that the application was more or less pretty straightforward. But that being said, if anyone wants me to take a look at it or whatever, I'd be happy to do so. I'll just say that for me, I was involved with a lot of extracurriculars. I played flute in high school. I made all-state every year. I was on the tennis team, JV and varsity. And I did some, like, I was in like I did some sort of art competitions and some volunteering during the school year. But overall, if you need help looking at your application or whatever, I'd be happy to help look at that.
Okay. I think then we can go into maybe more general STEM questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
So our first questions that we have is that when did you first become interested in tech, or was there a moment when you knew you were going to be majoring in industrial engineering or like the STEM field?
Well, so for me, because I didn't know that I was going to go to tech, I actually I originally wanted to do business or economics. But because I went to tech, I thought, okay, I have to do engineering because this is such a good engineering school. And so I picked the engineering that was closest to business. And, I don't regret it one bit. But there wasn't a point that I knew. Like, I will be very honest and say that I didn't really know what I wanted to do before college. I think it's crazy that they make you have to pick. I feel like a lot of people don't really know until they get there. Like, I'm someone who, I think I like one thing, but then until I try it out, I don't know, right? And so I fell in love with industrial engineering when I started when I started co-oping for Cisco, because that's when it started hitting me like, oh my gosh, like, this is the real world. This is what people do for their jobs. And it was fulfilling to me, because I think that, you can take classes in history, you can take classes in biology, but like, unless if you have a way to apply what you learn, it's just, you have all of this information in your mind and you're walking around like, okay, what am I going to do with this information? But with industrial engineering, and especially with the experiential learning, like co-ops and internships, you really start to see how some of this applies in real life, and it's true, you don't use everything that you learn in your jobs. I would say, like, I got a lot of information and I learned a lot at tech, and I use not so much of it, but it's like the way that they teach you to think and the way that you're able to solve problems is kind of like the basis of engineering and like the basis of industrial engineering. And that's what I fell in love with.
Do you feel like there's any challenge of being a woman, or how do you think is the diversity in STEM related field?
So for industrial engineering, our ratio is not super bad. It was about 50-50, so like 50 girls, 50% girls, 50% guys. And in the working environment, I have been fortunate enough that Cisco's culture was very good in terms of, recruiting for diversity. Even though I was one of the most junior members on my team, most of my teammates are 30, 40 years old with kids. I never felt necessarily out of place. They respected my opinion. And now at McMaster Carr, same thing. They've hired a very diverse group of very young individuals who are looking to make an impact on their distribution networks and the way they run the business. But I will say that there can be challenges, right? I feel like right now starting out is okay, but once you start growing in your career, that's when you start potentially hitting roadblocks, and that's when you would want to look for mentors or executive sponsors, so people that are, a couple layers of leadership above you who are able to help mentor you. And I know that within like industrial engineering is okay, but some of the other engineering classes, like again, my best friend is an aerospace engineer, and he said by his like very upper level classes, there'd be, 2 to 3 girls in a class. And so thankfully I've never really experienced that, but it definitely does happen in some of the majors that you can pick.
All right. So we have our last question is that, do you have any advice for high school students, maybe specifically girls who are interested in pursuing the STEM related field?
Yeah, so I will say that I was not very STEM oriented in high school, and that having gone through Georgia Tech now, I cannot be more proud of being STEM. It is a very challenging, I wouldn't say it's like a challenging career, but it definitely is like tech will chew you up and spit you back out. But you gain like a sense of confidence, you gain a sense of, you just become so much like down to earth, and you want to solve problems and help make the world better, right? And if you already have that mindset in high school, like that is awesome. Keep doing what you're doing. I think the world needs more engineers. I think there's a lot of problems that need to be solved. And unfortunately, I feel like a lot of the talent goes into investment banking or whatever. But I think if you're in STEM and you're looking to design the next new product, or you're like looking to code maybe the next Facebook or the next Instagram, these are very tangible ways where you're able to impact the world and you're able to see the results of your work, right? And so if that's what drives you, and like that's what drives me, but I didn't know that until going to college. But if you already know that that's what you want to do in high school, like keep doing what you're doing, be proud of your work, and just let that passion shine through. And when you're writing your application or when you're interviewing, tech will be able to see that, and you will be a perfect culture fit in terms of just the people that you meet, because like everybody is down to earth. Everybody, just wants to solve problems and be the best version of themselves and contribute in any way that they can.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, you can find me on LinkedIn, or if you have any other questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me, or if you have Jessie's number or whatever, have her get in contact with me, and I would be happy to help provide advice, look at resumes, whatever you need me to do, and I'll be happy to help you any way I can. Good chatting.